Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another installment of our ongoing journey in trying to understand the history and development of Jewish practice. Now, we had a few weeks hiatus because of I went to Israel for 2 Shabbatot, and I think there was Hanukkah, I don't know what it was. So it's been a while, and the example that we're studying, it happened to have been Chanuka because I wanted to do things related to the holidays. So the big plan was to take issues within Chanuka, Purim, that's the next big holiday coming up, and then Pesach after that. So even though last I noticed Hanukkah's over, however, it doesn't really matter because we're not here to learn the laws of Chanuka. You might have noticed that we have been really completely focused on one particular small passage in the Talmud. It's not like a comprehensive how to do Hanukkah thing, because we're just trying to see how the halachic system works. And it happens to be we're using examples that are timely instead of being completely arbitrary to somehow being linked to the time period. Now, let me just tell you what we did in the past couple sessions, because that was a long time ago, and how it's going to then flow seamlessly into what we're going to be doing tonight. And it might last for a couple of nights, what we're going to be starting tonight. Last time we engaged in a discipline which perhaps could be called in Hebrew parshanut, a Talmud. That is explanation of the Talmud. Meaning, we read through a passage in the Talmud and we tried to understand it on some minimally acceptable level. I have a feeling that some people may have felt, oh my God, this is getting complex and why are we going into so much detail? But the truth of the matter is, our treatment of the passage in the Talmud was a drop in the bucket of what we could do. And we could have taken a survey of every single possible explanation of every single passage in the Talmud, which is one way of approaching it. But for our purposes, I just wanted to get one coherent, hopefully coherent reading of the Talmud. Now, what we should have noticed, and I think I probably mentioned this at the end of the last session, is all very nice. The only problem is that the issue being discussed, I'll remind you what that issue is in just a second, is left in the Talmud as a dispute. But here we have 3 faithful Jews who just want to know what to do on Chanuka. I'm not sure about the 4th over here. Oh, I'm sorry. 301 faithful Jews. I don't want to underestimate the crowd here tonight. 301. So we're left in a quandary because the Talmud itself just simply presented 3 views and went on to the next topic. But we have to light Hanukkah candles next year. And these issues which we're discussing could have come up. Okay. So the next step is to move away from parshanut to Talmud, the explanation of the Talmud, to the period of, or the endeavor of, codification, psak halacha, to come to specific decisions. How do you get from the Talmud itself, which presents 3 different views, to some type of uniform halachic decision that you could actually implement in real life? Yes.
Ask your rabbi.
Ask your rabbi. I like your attitude. So that's one way. And serious. I mean, even though you were being funny, but the truth of the matter is that your answer is controversial. And I don't want to say too much right now. I'll just sort of tell you why, because we're going to see that there is a very big tension when it comes to the issue of creating a law code Why? Law codes in a certain respect are vital, and in a certain respect are damaging. Why? Well, they're vital because without knowing what to do, we don't know what to do. Furthermore, if everything's left to asking your rabbi, which Tara suggested, I hope I didn't shatter your anonymity now globally. So you may be getting fan mail now. So if you ask your local rabbi, we have a very severe danger, the Jewish people, because we're scattered all over the planet. Yes, we do control the world. And in order to do that, we have to be scattered all over the planet. That is not true. It is true we scatter over the planet. So if everybody asks their local rabbi, it won't take too long before we become almost unrecognizable, one Jewish community to another. There'll be no sense of uniformity. It won't be one Torah. It'll be many Torot. Okay? So the way one deals with that is to create a law code, which is an attempt at creating some type of uniformity. Now, on the other hand, writing a law code is problematic. And there's a great advantage of just asking your local rabbi. Why? Because part of the halachic dynamic is a vibrancy and a fine attunement with local reality. So what is appropriate to Sacramento may not be appropriate to some godforsaken corner of the universe like Los Angeles or New York. Spiritually barren places.
There are hardly any Jews at all.
Exactly. But when you're in the center of Torah scholarship and vibrant Yiddishkeit like Sacramento, so we would develop certain organic and appropriate ways to local conditions of doing things, develop local minhag, local custom, which becomes a very important idea. And each community would do that. And that way the halakha becomes very organic, integrated into the nature of the local community. Right? It can adapt to change when necessary with regards to local community. On the other hand, and we can go back and forth, Judaism will fracture into a lot of Judaisms. So what you said is really an extremely important point, that there's a great advantage of the halakha being ask the rabbi versus look it up in the book, which has been published by Art Scroll, and everybody in the world can read that book and do the exact same thing all over the world. Okay, and you could go back and forth between those two views. Okay, you'll see this actually expressed as we discuss the different personalities and their works, of to what extent should a law code be a kind of voice coming from Sinai, establishing what the law is for everyone for all time, or whether it's something that's still fluid, individualistic, vibrant, organic, etc. That's a tension within the different law codes themselves. Okay. Now, a little bit of history. The Talmud is a document which has many, many layers, as we've seen, of teachers who are quoted going back from probably 30, 40 years. You know, Hillel lived 30, 40 years before the Common Era, right? Hillel and Shammai, those two great rabbis. And that's a very early stage in the scholars who are quoted in the Mishnah, all the way up till 5th century, you know, the Byzantine era, right? Before Islam. What happened between then and the first very significant law codes that we rely upon and are famous. So there is this period, which I'm sure some of you may have heard of, called the period of the Gaonim. The Gaonim were the heads of the yeshivot, the classical yeshivot, that existed from Talmudic times and continued in one form or the other in Babylonia. And that period of the Gaonim lasts for a tremendously long time. We're talking about 600 years, approximately, the period of the Gaonim. You want to hear something amazing? That's a long time. We have almost zero works from the time of the Gaonim. We have, it's not zero, happens, but it's close to zero. Very few works from the time of the Gaonim. It's like a dark ages. Now
it's an unwritten ages.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was about to say that. Right. It's not dark ages in the sense of, it's sort of maybe like the people say nowadays, going dark. Is there such an expression? Like when you're like sort of go undercover, you're not going to answer your phone for a while, or?
It's called getting off the grid.
Getting off the grid. So they were off the grid for some reason. We'll talk about that in a second. It wasn't dark in the sense of, primitive or anything like that, but they didn't write things. They didn't compose books. The question is why? Generally, there are some. There's a few. The She'el Tot and other Bahag. There are some books that come from that time period. Question is why? So it could be for the exact same reason that Tara said before, because halacha, in its most vibrant, natural expression, is a kind of go ask your local rabbi kind of thing. So go ask your local rabbi. What do I, why should you write law code, which is imposing some kind of standard on everybody? That's
your reference.
Oh yeah, the Talmud is always the reference.
They weren't scattered.
The Talmud is the reference. Jews are still scattered at this point. There's a lot of Jews in Babylonia, but there are Jews scattered all over the world,
Okay.
even at this early time.
I think the major population center.
Yeah, the Middle East is
the Middle East.
That's certainly true.
So that in effect, why do we have to write it down? Because
We're all there anyway.
we're all here, and the
That's
few
right.
that are in Israel, they'll get the word because we're going back and forth
Right.
a lot. And for the rest of the world, who knows? They'll
That could
pick
be.
it up somehow.
That's a very good
in
point.
Rome and Spain or wherever they are.
That's an excellent point. I would just add to that, I think that's a very good point, that, this whole idea of writing things down,
So easy.
not only was
The printing press.
okay, first of all, there's no printing press. Okay, so, but that never stopped. There are plenty of books that were created before the printing press, but it is a good point. It's not so easy to disseminate literature. But there is another factor, and that is it's not so easy for a different reason. It's not theologically or halachically easy, because we always forget. We're the people of the book, as the Muslims call us, right? That happens to be true. That expression comes from Islam, that expression. We're the monotheistic, a monotheistic religion, which we have a kind of a special status under Islam. Like you don't have to die, but as long as you're subservient. So in any case, the point I want to make is that we were not supposed to write down the oral law at all,
Right.
right? Writing down oral law was never supposed to be done. There shouldn't have been a Mishnah. There shouldn't have been a Talmud. Right? These things there were unfortunate compromises with difficult historical reality. So the fact that you had a period in which things were written down really shouldn't be so surprising, because it might reflect, in a certain sense, a kind of the default. In other words, the default is you shouldn't be writing books. The halacha is something that Torah Sheba'al Peh. We talk about it, we remember it, we analyze it. We teach our children it. They teach their children it. It's a constant kind of dialogue and organic kind of growth and an oral culture, if we could call it that. So in a certain sense, that might also explain why a lot of books were written. However, we do know what they thought. Why? Because when we get to the end of the period of the Gaonim, we get to the 11th century. So that's the beginning of what we call in Jewish traditional historiography the period of the Rishonim, the first ones. The first ones. So they often quote the Geonim. Okay, how did they know what the Geonim said? They didn't have any books, or very few books, I should say. There's a simple reason.
They had an oral tradition.
They had their own tradition, because this is really the way it's supposed to work, right? That we have these oral traditions and we pass them down to our students and our children. And so they knew about these traditions. And when they wrote books, they would cite the opinions of the Geonim. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do starting tonight is to take a look at the most famous of the Rishonim for the purpose of creating definitive Jewish practice. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Rishonim, probably thousands, right? Any famous rabbi who lived basically from the 11th century to the 16th century is the period of the Rishonim. So that there are many, but I'm choosing 3 of the Rishonim specifically. Those 3 are Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi, and we're going to talk a little bit about each one of these, who's commonly called the Rif because it's an acronym of his name. Rabbi Yitzchak, that's Reish Yud, and Fez, Fasi, that's a Pei, so you got Rif. Okay? And then we're going to be discussing the second great pillar, the Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, the personality of everybody, Maimonides, everybody's familiar with that name. And the third leg of this, the third pillar, is the Ramban. Interestingly not. Interestingly not. The Rosh. The Rosh. Okay? The Rosh is Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel. That's his real name. We call him Rosh, Rabbi Asher. Rosh. We like to abbreviate things. Okay? So those 3 scholars, the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh, are the main 3 pillars that we'll be examining, though there are many, many other highly significant scholars. I don't want you to think that there were 3 rabbis and that's it, and they're the ones we have to discuss. There are many, but those are 3 significant pillars. I'll tell you why they're significant, and you'll appreciate more as we go on, because what perhaps is the most significant halachic compendium, incredibly authoritative and influential, written in the past 400 years, is of course the famous work, the Shulchan Aruch, the set table around Yosef Karo, 16th century. It's fine. Well, Rabbi Yosef Karo, who wrote this book that is the reference point of all halachic discussion. When Mark writes a book on the halachot of going to the gym, so it becomes a kind of commentary on Shulchan Aruch. You start with the Shulchan Aruch, and that's your starting point. That's the point of reference. It doesn't mean that he has to agree with everything in there. Later scholars after the Shulchan Aruch sometimes will disagree, but that is, you don't disagree easily with the Shulchan Aruch. Till this very day, that is the most fundamental reference work. You know, some of you may be familiar with a 20th century, early 20th century, very famous work. It's called the Mishnah Brura. You may have heard of that. So it was written by a very famous 20th century saintly rabbi, who you may have heard of, who had a name, but everybody calls him the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim was a very saintly rabbi, lived in the 20th century. I know 20th century is way before you were born. You can't recall it. It was a long time ago, the previous century. And the Chafetz Chaim wrote this compendium of halacha called the Mishnah Brura. What a lot of people don't realize, if they haven't actually studied the Mishnah Brura, is This is the Mishnah Berurah. And out there in digital land, this is the Mishnah Berurah. And if you open the Mishnah Berurah, okay. So the Mishnah Berurah is, in fact, up on top is the Shulchan Aruch. And the Mishnah Berurah over here is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. So that's very important realization that this sort of famous, almost contemporary work, if you consider 20th century contemporary, I do. So it's actually just a commentary on Shulchan Aruch. So Shulchan Aruch becomes the absolute central point of reference.
If you don't mind me asking. There's a square in there beside right here.
Square?
Yeah. See? There's different.
Oh, those are
very
different commentaries. There are
Okay.
other commentaries as well.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. So why am I telling you this? Because this incredibly significant work, Shulchan Aruch, the author, Rabbi Yosef Karo, says that his halachic decisions are going to be primarily based upon his great predecessors among the Rishonim, the great pillars of halacha, and he names them. Who are they? The Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh. So that's why, looking back historically, if we want to understand how halacha be developed, that those are the most important personalities to look at in trying to understand how you get from the Talmud to the Rishonim and their law codes, and ultimately to the Shulchan Aruch, and ultimately up to the Mishnah Berurah. And it didn't stop there. There are law codes that are being churned out as we speak.
Is that the fundamental reason why the Rambam was criticized in his Mishnah Torah for not citing where he got his decisions?
Yes. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
Because therefore, nobody can trace back the oral tradition.
Right.
He just says, this is what you're supposed to do, without saying the background, quoting the historic reference point.
So you know what?
don't know if it's his opinion or it's a tradition that's been passed down. That he wrote.
Correct. Except save it, because that's going to be part of our discussion. Okay. So now what we're going to do now is going to be a real challenge, because we're going to have to remember, at least in broad strokes, the passage in the Talmud that we studied. We don't have to remember all the exact nitty-gritty. We have to remember it basically. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Rif, okay? Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. And then we're going to read how he codifies the passage in the Talmud. And we're going to try to appreciate what he did with the Talmud. That's our plan. Everybody ready? So what I'd like to do is just do a very quick review of the Talmud. And I have the English translation that I distributed over there. And also this Hebrew packet, which is the first source is just the passage from the Talmud. So I'm going to read it kind of quick and just remember briefly what we said without going into too much detail. And then we're going to talk about who the Rif was and then learn the Rif. Okay, let's read the passage in the Talmud. Now you remember that the Mishnah had listed wicks and oils which are not permissible to use on Shabbat. So the Talmud then goes into a discussion. Those inferior wicks and oils which you can't use on Shabbat, are they acceptable to be used on Chanuka? And if you remember our discussion, the answer to that was divided into two components. One component was being used on any night of Hanukkah, like a weeknight of Hanukkah. Tuesday night, I think, was my favorite night to discuss. I don't know why. And a separate issue, is there any special problem of using those inferior wicks and oils on Friday night, right before Shabbat comes in, you light the Hanukkah candles? Those issues were treated separately. Let's read through the Talmud and remind ourselves what it said. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna said, "Pitilot ushmanim she'amru chachamim ein madlikin behen b'Shabbat." Those wicks and oils which our sages said in the Mishnah that one is not allowed to use them on Shabbat. Now, what about Chanuka? Ein madlikin behen b'Chanuka ben b'Shabbat ben b'chol. One cannot use them on Chanuka either. And I don't care whether it's Tuesday night or Friday night. That was the opinion of Rav Huna. Okay. Now, as you'll recall, Rav Huna does not explain his reasoning. Along comes the Talmud and says, what is the theory behind that halachic statement? That those inferior wicks, which are not allowed on Shabbat, they're also not allowed on Chanukah, whether it's Tuesday night or Friday night of Chanukah. What's the theory? Amar Rava, so Rava said, my Tama de Rav Huna, what is the reasoning behind Rav Huna's opinion? Kasavar, oh, it's simple. He holds of the two following axioms, Kavta Zakukla, that if the Chanukah candles should accidentally go out, then one is required to relight them. That's one axiom he must have held. Second axiom, Umuktar lishtamesh la'ora. Furthermore, he held that you are allowed to use the light which comes from the Chanukah candle. Those are the two axioms which explain his position that you're never allowed to use inferior wicks and oils on Chanukah, whether Tuesday or Friday. What is the connection between those two axioms and the fact you're not allowed to use the inferior wicks and oils neither on Tuesday nor on Friday? Well, simple, as we explained, because since the halacha is kavta zakukla, that if it goes out, one is required to relight it, we're afraid that you'll be lazy on Tuesday. What's going to happen? You lit the Chanukah candles. So you think you're done. You sit down, read the New York Times, and a wind comes in, blows out the candles, and you say, oh, well. But since the halacha is axiomatically, according to Rav Huna, as suggested by Rava, that the law is, if it goes out, you have to relight it. So therefore, we want to maximize the conditions so that the candle doesn't burn out. So you won't have to come to the situation where it's going to burn out because it's not a stable flame. So therefore, we want you to use high-quality wicks and oils. And therefore, hopefully, there won't be a problem that'll go out by itself. And you won't have to be put in the position of being lazy and fail to relight it. That explains why you can't use, hang on a second, you look like you have a question, but hang on. That explains why you can't use inferior wicks and oils on Tuesday. Now, what's the relevance of the second axiom that you're allowed to use the light? Well, that explains why you can't use inferior wicks and oils on Friday night. Because if you can use the light and you're reading the New York Times by the light of this oil lamp, and it's already now Shabbat, and the lousy candles and wicks, it's not making a good light, so you want to increase the quality of the flame, so you want to have more oil flow into the wick, so you take the little candle and you tilt it so the oil flows more into the wick. Well, that'll make more light, but what have you just done? Lost your place in the world to come and will burn in hell forever. Yes, you have desecrated the Shabbat. Okay, so that's the reason that you can't use it on Tuesday or Friday night. Not on Tuesday because we want to maximize the probability that the candle will last, the light will last, and you won't be tempted to, if it goes out, flickers out, that you won't relight it. And on Friday night, because since you can use the candle, you might be tempted to tilt it and increase the flame. You're not allowed to increase the flame on Shabbat. That is a view of Rav Huna as explained by Rav. Let me just get through all three views.
Oh, no, I was just going to comment that this is a period of time when the menorah is supposed to be outside of the dwelling.
Right.
So that if you use materials that don't burn well and go out, you're never going to keep that menorah lit. That's
a good point. You're basically inviting disaster if you don't have a good, strong
Well, you're not
flame.
showing that, you're making it so that you may not really
Pursuing
do the
the
mitzvah,
same
but without
process.
fulfilling the mitzvah.
Well, that's
100%. And that's what we mean by kavta zakukla, since according to this assumption, if it goes out, you have to light it because it has to burn a certain amount of time. So, and it's going to be exposed to the elements. That's your point.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure it's a stable flame. That's the point. Okay. That's the opinion of Rav Huna. Well, guess what? There's another opinion. I know it's shocking. Rav Chisda Amar madlikin bahen bachol aval lo b'Shabbat. Hello, come on in. Welcome, welcome. So Rav Chisda said that we can use those inferior wicks. This is the exact polar opposite opinion. Inferior wicks and oils are allowed both on Chol, on Tuesday, Aval lo b'Shabbat, but not on Friday. Okay, sorry, it's not really the polar opposite, split view. Okay, so inferior wicks and oils are allowed to be used on Tuesday, but not on Friday. Now, what's the theory behind that? So the Talmud says, see, Rav Chisda doesn't explain himself. So the Talmud says, kasavar, because he must hold the opinion, kavta ein zakukla, that if it goes out, you don't have to relight it. That's the halacha. The mitzvah is to light it. And if you lit it, you're done. That must be the assumption of Rav Chisda. What does that explain? Why on Chol? On Tuesday, it's okay to use inferior wicks and oils. You don't have to have a stable flame. Why? Because once you lit it, you're done. You're finished. You did the mitzvah. Because kavta ein zakukla, if it goes out, you don't have to relight it. So it's okay to use lousy wicks and oils on Tuesday. But what about Friday night? So Rav Chisda must hold the opinion, mutar lishtamesh lo ra, just like we said last time, that you're allowed to use the light of the Chanuka candle. So if on Friday night, after Shabbat comes in, you're reading the New York Times by the light of your Chanuka candle, you may be tempted to tilt it, right? And therefore, and you end up being Mechal Shabbat, that's already the Shabbat. And so therefore, we want to have high quality wicks and oils if you're lighting on Friday, but inferior wicks and oils are okay if it's on Tuesday. That's the view of Rav Chisda. And then we have the third view. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rav Matna, Vamre Le, Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rav. So we'll just call this Rav's opinion, because Rav is the earliest of the teachers who are quoted here. And Rav says the following. Pitulot ushmanim she'amru chachamim madlakin behem b'Shabbat, madlakin behem b'Chanukah behem b'chol behem b'Shabbat. This is the polar opposite of the first opinion. That those lousy wicks and oils, you know what? You can use lousy wicks and oils either on Tuesday or on Friday. Now, what's the logic behind that? Rav didn't explain, but Rabbi Yirmiyah explained. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, my Tama de Rav. What's the reason of Rav? Kasavar, he explains, kavta ein zakukla. It must be that Rav held of the following opinion, that if it accidentally sputters out, you don't have to relight it. That explains why on Tuesday you can use inferior wicks and oils, because the mitzvah is just to light it. If it sputters out, it's okay. Now, what about Friday night? Why can you use inferior wicks and oils on Friday night? Because it must be he holds asulish tmeish l'ra. You're not allowed to use the light coming from the Chanuka candles. So therefore, since you're not going to be reading the New York Times by the light of the Chanuka candles, what won't you be tempted to do? Tilt the candle, and there's no problem with Chol Shabbat. So therefore, it can be lousy wicks and oils on Friday night because you won't be tempted to tilt it. And you can use lousy wicks and oils on Tuesday because if it goes out, so what? You did the mitzvah of barely lighting it.
So the mitzvah is to light.
Right.
The mitzvah is
Not that it
exists.
exists, just to light it. Right, according to that view.
I have trouble with the fulfillment of the mitzvah for lighting as the actual mitzvah.
Yeah, you know what? Don't ask me.
Okay.
I'll just tell you why. Because I'm trying to move away, because that's what we did last time, the Parshanut part,
Yeah,
right, of just explaining the Talmud. I want to now, the only reason I'm doing this is because we have a three-way dispute here, and I want to know how we get from a three-way dispute into what's the normative halacha, okay? So now let's just go, we're going to quickly finish off the Talmud here. You'll forgive me, and I'm happy to discuss it afterwards, okay? Amaruhu Rabbanan Kami de Abai Mishmei de Rabbi Yirmiyah, v'lo kibla. So there are a bunch of rabbis went before a scholar named Abaye, and they quoted the opinion of Rav in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah was the rabbi who just explained the opinion of Rav, that he must have held of the opinion that if it goes out it's not a problem, and they're not allowed to use a light, so there's no problem of tilting it on Friday, right, on Shabbat. So they went to this great rabbi, Abaye, and they said, oh, Rabbi Yirmiyah said that Rav said X. And you know what he said? I don't believe it. Remember we discussed this last time? And there's a weird story here. Kiata Ravin, and when Ravin came, it's not Yitzhak Ravin, but when Ravin came, this rabbi came from the land of Israel to Babylonia. Amaruhu Rabbanan Kamei de Abaye Mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan V'Kibla. So the rabbis said the same teaching to Abaye, but didn't quote Rabbi Yirmiyah this time. They quoted Rabbi Yochanan, a more famous rabbi, V'Kibla. And then Abaye said, now I believe it. It's the exact same facts, but coming associated with Rabbi Yochanan. Yeah, okay, Rabbi Yochanan, that I believe. Rabbi Yirmiyah, I'm not sure I accept it. We tried to explain last time why when Abaye heard it quoted in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, he didn't like it, and in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he did like it. But you'll see the YouTube video to remind you of what we said. Amar, and then Abaye said, you know what? Izakai gamirte lishmate meikara. You know what? If I had merited, I would have accepted this tradition the first time I heard it, when it was in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah instead of Rabbi Yochanan. The Hagam Ras, the Talmud says, what's the difference whether you accepted it the first time or the second time? So the Talmud says, Nafkamina Lagirsa the Yankuta, because it's always better to learn things the first time around when you're younger. Try learning a musical instrument or another language when you're over 50. Okay. So now there's one last passage which you haven't done yet, so this is going to be new, okay? And but it's going to be important. The Kavta in Zakukla, so the Talmud says, wait a second. We're saying that the great Rabbi Rav hold, and Larry had a problem with this, and I'm not sure Mark had a problem because Mark just stated it, that if it burns out, it's okay, as long as you lit it. Right? So Mark just made an observation. I guess the mitzvah is to light it, not to have it exist. And Larry said, how could that be? That sounds very weird. So the Talmud also thinks it's weird. So the Talmud says, the kaftein zakukla, if it burns out, sputters out, you don't have to relight it. Uramin who, that seems to contradict something that I know about. What do I know about? Because there's an ancient teaching coming from the same time as the Mishnah. Uramin who. That seems to contradict this. What's that ancient teaching? And I'm going to tell you what that teaching is, and you try to figure out how this ancient teaching contradicts an assumption that says the mitzvah is just to light it, doesn't matter if it burns out. This ancient teaching coming from the time of the Mishnah says, the mitzvah is from the time the sun sets until the last leg has left the marketplace, right? Everybody in the mall went home. Okay. No more people in Arden Fair. So the Talmud thinks that this shows you my lavdi kavta hadar madlikla. Doesn't this clearly indicate that if it burns out, you got to light it again? So can anybody explain that? How that teaching, which says that the mitzvah is from the time that the sun sets until the last people leave Arden Fair Mall, that seems to suggest it's not lighting it. It's the exist. Very good, Marganita. Very good. The brightness seems to say there's a time period in which the flame has to exist. As Mark put it, has to exist. What's the time period? From sunset till the last person leaves Arden Fair Mall. Right? That's a period. That seems to indicate that if it sputters out before that time period is up, last people leaving Arden Fair Mall, that you got to relight it. So how could the Talmud have suggested that there is at least prominent rabbis, like Rav, for instance, who said that as long as you lit it, it's okay. It doesn't matter that it sputtered out. Kafta ein zakukla, goes out, you don't have to relight it. So the Talmud says, no problema. We misunderstood that ancient tradition. How so? Lo di'ilo adlik madlik. It means not that it has to exist during the period of the setting of the sun till the last customer leaves Arden Fair Mall. What it means is that if you didn't get a chance to light it from the time that the sun set, you have this interval of time to light it. It doesn't mean that the flame has to exist during this entire period. This is the window of opportunity to light it. Wow, okay. So the Talmud says inami, and if you don't like that answer, I got a better answer, or not necessarily better, but alternative answer. L'shiura. It's a reference to the quantity of oil which you have to put in the Hanukkah lamp in order for it to properly do the mitzvah. You should put in as much oil as theoretically could burn from the setting of the sun until the last customer leaves Arden Fair Mall. Not that it has to, in fact. I mean, it's best if it would. But, so you should create the conditions, which hopefully it would. But if it sputters out, it's okay, because really the mitzvah is the lighting. So it could be that that's what that ancient tradition means. Either one of those two things. That's the interval for lighting if you haven't lit it yet, or it's a reference to how much oil you should put in the lamp. Okay, so either way, if that's what that ancient tradition means, that it no longer contradicts the assumption that the mitzvah is the lighting, not the existence of the flame. Now, I just want to point out something which is very, very fundamental to the halachic system that we just see here. Let's say I'm Rav, right? I'm the rabbi who apparently is saying that the mitzvah is just to light the candle. It doesn't actually have to, the flame doesn't have to exist. You just have to light the candle. If it sputters out, it's okay. That Rav held that opinion, apparently. So I'm Rav. Someone comes along to me and says, Rav, how could you say such a thing? We have an ancient tradition coming from the time of the Mishnah. I'm an Amora. I'm a rabbi from the time of the Talmud, right after the Mishnah. So how could you say such a thing? We have a bright tradition coming from the time of the Mishnah, right? If from 100 years before you lived, 200 years, 300 years before you lived. And it says, its mitzvah is from the time of the setting of the sun to the last customer leaves Arden Fair Mall, which seems to imply that the light has to exist during that entire interval. Now, the Talmud said, well, it's not really a problem because we're misinterpreting that ancient tradition. But one could ask, why is it a problem in the first place? Because why doesn't Rav just say, you know what? That ancient tradition holds of the premise that the mitzvah is that the light exists during that time period. But it's a free country here in Sacramento. And I hold differently. I hold the mitzvah is just to light the candle, not that the flame exists. So don't bother me with that ancient tradition. I hold a different assumption. You notice that Talmud didn't give that answer. That wasn't one of the options. Instead, it reinterpreted that ancient tradition to make it that it doesn't contradict Rav, right? By reinterpreting it. We reconciled it instead of just saying, well, I disagree. Well, why didn't the Talmud just say, well, Rav disagrees? Rabbis disagree all the time in the Talmud.
But it's always in reference to previous cases. Like the American legal system, any judgment is referenced on the basis of previous judgment.
Okay.
Rather than the no.
Oh, okay, good. I first didn't understand what you meant, but yes. So let me say it in slightly different language. You can disagree with a contemporary. So if Rabbi Mark and I have a disagreement over some of the halachot of how to use a gym, I think he's one.
No. On the gym, we can dispute. On cross-country skiing, I'm the authority here.
Okay.
Oh.
Really?
And I'm definitive.
Okay. In any case, contemporaries can disagree. But something coming from a far enough ancient period, which is considered to be already, the word I'm looking for is accepted, definitive,
Defined.
established. What's the word used? I don't like the word, but people when they, like in certain Bible academic circles, they talk about like when the Bible became
Codified.
not codified, but like when it became sort of sealed as like their books come from different time periods.
Canonized.
Canonized. Canonized. Whoa! Checks in the mail. Margarita's hot tonight. Okay, canonized. Wow. So there are earlier opinions that had become canonized. Okay, so if I'm later, I can't disagree. And Mark gave an example from kind of contemporary legal systems. You know, there were a bunch of lawyers, whatever, who wrote the Constitution of the United States of America, right? Now, why can't I, let's say I'm a judge here in Sacramento, and I say something, and someone says, you can't say that, that's unconstitutional. So I'll say, so what? I have my right to my opinion. I don't care what those fellows said back then, hundreds of years ago. It's a free country here in Sacramento. I'll say whatever I want to. It doesn't work that way because the framers of the Constitution, that's canonical.
Actually, they did retract.
You can change the Constitution, but it's very hard to do. So there's a similar kind of principle in Jewish law so hang on a second, that the opinions which come from the time of the Mishnah, generally speaking, up to the 2nd century of the Common Era, those are canonical. The rabbis who lived in that period can argue with each other all they want to. And I, who live after that period, let's say I'm a rabbi from the time of the Talmud, so I'm living after the 2nd century of the Common Era, I could side with one of the rabbis that came from the time of the Mishnah, but I couldn't give a third opinion. That's not allowed. Okay? That's why when the Talmud said, how could Rav held the opinion that the mitzvah is just to light it, not that the flame exists? We have a tradition coming from the time of the Mishnah, which is canonical, right? You got to put that in there now to understand it, which says that it has to continue to burn from the time of the setting of the sun till the last customer leaves Arden Fair Mall. So the Talmud said, oh, there's not really a contradiction. It doesn't say, oh, Rav is right to his own opinion because it's canonical, right? The opinions that come from the time of the Mishnah are canonical. Okay, fine. Now, we have a problem. Let's take the view in sort of in the biggest way. The original question: are inferior wicks and oils allowed to be used on Chanuka? They're not allowed to use on Shabbat. You know, for Shabbat candles. What about Hanukkah candles? Well, guess how many opinions we had on that? Uno, dos, tres. 3 opinions, right? We have Rav Huna that said, no, you can never use them on Hanukkah, whether it's Tuesday on Hanukkah or Friday on Hanukkah. We had Rav Chisda that said, oh, not so fast. You could use it on Tuesday night, the inferior wicks and oils, but not on Friday night. And we had Rav who said, you can always use them, whether it's Tuesday night or Friday night. Period. We're done. Wait a second. I want to know, can I use lousy wicks and oils on Hanukkah? Give me the answer. Not found. Whoa, I am frustrated. I should ask my rabbi. Okay. So I'm going to now throw this out to the Council of Torah Scholars here. That includes everybody here. Let's say you're the rabbi and someone says, hey, you know, am I allowed to use inferior wicks and oils on Hanukkah? Well, how would you resolve that question? Anyone want to take a stab at it?
I think I'd err on the side of using the superior ones.
Okay, look at that. This pious angel, commonly known as Marguerite, says, look, if I can play it safe, there's no prohibition using high quality wicks and oils. I got to spend a little more money, and that way I'm fine. There's none of the rabbis, you know, that place, like the third opinion, Rav, who says you can use lousy wicks and oils on Hanukkah, whether it's Tuesday or Friday, So he's not gonna. So you go to him and say, Rabbi, I know you hold you can use lousy wicks and oils, but I'd like to use high quality. He's not gonna say, no, don't do that. That's forbidden. You know, if you want to spend more money and use better wicks and oils, you know, God bless you, right? So that's Marganite. You know that is one of the ways that decisions are made. It's not just because you're a pious angel, but it happens to be that is a way of saying, you know what? Why don't we adopt a more strict opinion? That way we're safe, right? Okay, so that's one approach. Any other thoughts of how we're going to resolve a three-way dispute here?
Would you want to decide based on the situation of the person who's asking the question? Like maybe they can't afford.
Okay,
expensive.
very nice. So that would be another alternative. I could say, you know what? I know that this person over here, they don't really have much money. And since I have three views here in the Talmud, I assume they're all kosher. They're fine, upstanding rabbis who said these three things. I'll choose the one that would be most appropriate for this person who doesn't have any money. And so I'll choose the third opinion, Rav, because Rav says you can always use lousy wicks and oils, and that would help economically, you know, this particular family. Very nice. Any other ways of resolving this issue here?
Well, there may be another criteria that was not introduced.
Go ahead.
That
What,
would reconcile.
to show that they actually aren't disagreeing?
No, to show that that to, no. The idea is not to show that they're disagreeing, to show whether the mitzvah is filled for Hanukkah. In other words, all would be in agreement that if the Hanukkah candles were lit, no matter how long, with inferior or not, during the time in the marketplace when people are there, that none of these three would disagree. That's not a valid point. It's a valid point. So, again, I'm going back to the case of pursue, to publicize the miracle. So, question is.
Yeah, but my question is, am I allowed to use inferior wicks and oils? And yes or no? What's the answer?
Well,
That's the answer.
Well, it's a three-way dispute in the Talmud. Okay, so I'm kind of left here with a little confused. So I'll tell you what I like to do. We're gonna have to. Okay, here's our choice. I actually have a meeting at 8:00, but I can be a few minutes late. So we can lightning fast. I can tell you who Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi was, and we can actually read what he said. I try to do that in 10 minutes. Or we can just save that for next week. Now, the only problem is I got to pick up my wife in the airport next week in San Francisco. So let's do it. Let's do the Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi now. You ready for this, everybody? Okay.
Where is it?
It's nowhere. I mean, it's on the piece of paper, but what I can tell you right now is not, you don't have. Okay? Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, so he was born in 1013 in Algeria, and he died in 1103 in Spain. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, the reason it's called Alfasi because it means Fez. The person comes from Fez, from Morocco. So he was born in a little town in Algeria, but then his family moved to the big city, Fez, in Morocco. And when he was 75 years old, it's interesting, sort of skipping to he's an old man already. So he had to leave Fez. You know why? Because someone spread a rumor about him. Nobody knows what the rumor was, but it was so slanderous that he had to leave town. This is not the first time this has happened, okay, to a rabbi. And guess where he went to? Spain. Okay, a lot of people flee to Spain. Okay, I think I'm going to go to Spain
Lucky
pretty
he
soon.
didn't have a Facebook page.
Okay. So he went to Spain. He went to Cordova, and then he went to Lucena. Is that how you pronounce that? Lucena, town in Spain. And he established an academy in Lucena, and he had a very significant student among his students who you'll hear about later, Rabbi Yosef Ibn Migash. Okay, we'll talk more about him a little bit later. In any case, Rabbi Yitzchak Ofasi, for our discussion, became extremely important because he wrote a book that is called Sefer HaHalachot, the Book of Laws. The Book of Laws. And this Book of Laws is, well, I won't tell you what it is. Let's learn it. So if you take a look at your sheet here, now it's in Hebrew, so you'll forgive me. Okay, it's on the second page. Okay, see where it says at the top, Rif Masechet Shabbat, Daf Tet Amud Aleph. Okay, I'm going to read it and translate it. Okay, so you just listen. But try to bear in mind, I want you to compare this to the Talmud. We just read the Talmud. So as I read the Rif, I want you to, in your mind, be sounded like, not musically, the words. Hilchot Chanukah, the laws of Chanukah. Amar Rabbi Zera Amar Rav. Rabbi Zera said in the name of Rav, those inferior wicks and oils that the sages said you shouldn't use on Shabbat, for the purpose of Hanukkah, you can use them, whether it's Tuesday night or Friday night. From the fact that we see that he said that you can light them on Hanukkah, even on Friday night of Hanukkah, we learn from this that you're not allowed to use the light. Because since you're not allowed to use the light, you won't come to tilt the candle to increase the flame. The two, and furthermore, the fact that you can use inferior wicks and oils on Friday, you can see from this that if it goes out, you don't have to relight it. So we see from this that he holds that if it goes out, you don't have to light it. And the fact that there's an ancient tradition that says that the mitzvah is from the time the sun sets until the last cusp release ardent from all, that doesn't imply that if it goes out, you have to relight it because it has to burn an entire period. Ella the ilo adlik madlik. It's to tell you that this is the entire window of opportunity to light it. Inamili shura, or else to tell you how much oil has to be put into the candle. Okay, let's stop there. Comments. I know that was a little fast. How is this different than it sounds a lot like the Talmud, doesn't it? Except for big difference.
No, this is definitive. This is the way it is.
What did he do? So let's try to define this. The Talmud presented on this issue of using inferior wicks and oils. How many opinions? Three. What did he do?
He took the most makel, the most.
He took the third most lenient. Very good. He took only the third opinion, Rav. Now you notice he doesn't state it in his own language. He actually, it's a more or less a quote. Much of this is really a quote of the Talmud. Rabbi Zera said in the name of Rav. He's quoting but he's not just quoting, because you notice that he built into it a certain amount of explanation of what the Talmud means. I don't know if you noticed that. He actually teased out a lot better than the Talmud does about how we derive those axioms that we talked about, that from the fact, because Rav only said those inferior wicks and oils that you're not allowed to use on Shabbat, you can use them on Hanukkah no matter when, Tuesday night or Friday night. That's all it said. The Talmud later said, what's going on in his assumptions. The Talmud said, oh, he must hold that if it burns out, you don't have to relight it. And you're not allowed to use the oil for light. You're not allowed to use the light. You know, actually, the Talmud didn't actually explain, like, what's one thing have to do? What do those assumptions have to do with the halacha of that you're allowed to use inferior wicks and oils? Well, how do those assumptions lead to the halacha? We explained it, but Talmud didn't explain it. He explains it. So right away, we see two interesting things. He paraphrases the Talmudic discussion, but leaves out the other opinions, only quotes, paraphrases the opinion which he holds by. Plus, there's a little bit of explanatory material that he puts in there.
Interpreted the lighting it before dark and before people in the marketplace.
He explains it.
Yeah,
He explains it. Right, so there's not just quoting his explanation. Okay, now, let me now discuss a little bit more broad. So Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, his book, Sefer Halachot, is sometimes called the Small Talmud. Because since he's paraphrasing, he's looking at the Talmud as he writes, and he's using the language of the Talmud itself. All the Aramaic, the exact words of the Talmud, right? But leaving a lot out, right? Leaving out alternative opinions in this particular case. Putting in a little bit of filler to be able to explain it better, okay? So his book became so popular because it became a much more efficient way of studying Talmud. Because instead of having three different opinions and fighting back and forth that's on the page of the Talmud, I can read the Rif and just get the bottom line, but still in the language of the Talmud and in, you know,
Get an idea of what the discussions were.
Yeah, right. It's not, man, it's not completely abstracted. I mean, you still feel like you're studying Talmud. It's just the most essential salient point is condensed. So that's exactly what it's called, the Talmud Katan or Shas Katan, and it's kind of the Reader's Digest version or the Monarch Cliff Notes, whatever you want to call it, version of the Talmud. It became so popular, people stopped studying Talmud. They would only learn the Shas Katan, this Sefer Halachot of Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. Okay. Now, one thing he didn't do, I asked you to choose one of the three opinions, right? How you would rule. Well, he chose, as Larry told us, he chose the third opinion, mostly opinion. You know what he didn't do in this particular case?
He didn't tell you why.
He didn't say why. Okay? So right now, we're far from done because we have to take a look at two other pillars. We want to see those two other pillars. Remember, they are the Rambam in his great work, the Mishnah Torah, and the Rosh, Piskei HaRosh. And that's what we'll do next time we meet in a couple of weeks. I have to pick up my wife at the airport next Wednesday. Yahoo!
Oh.
And my wife is coming.
Yes, I know. You
Yeah.
just said, but is she coming for a long time or?
No.
Just
My father's
vacation?
92nd birthday is a week from
Oh,
Sunday, so she's
wonderful.
coming in for that. Yeah. Wait, did I say my father?
Yes.
Friends are like, my wife's 92nd birthday.
No,
What-
you said
Your
sometimes
father-
it's-
you said your father's
Good,
92nd
good.
birthday.
And your wife's
Yeah,
coming
my wife's
for-
not 92.
She's coming for
She's
his
29. That's why I get confused.
birthday.
Okay. So the next time we meet, we'll take a look at that was great what we just did. We'll take a look at 2 weeks. We'll take a look at the Rambam and the Rosh, and then you know what we're going to do after that. So then we got to take a look. Well, okay, now we got the three pillars. Then how do you get to the Shulchan Aruch? And what does the Shulchan Aruch do to those three? Okay, and we'll see that next time. Bezrat Hashem.